Before we start the talk, a little information about myself. I'm currently working as Director of Engineering at Ask.fm. I already working 20 years in IT industry, and I'm originally from Estonia, and in Estonia we have highest amount of startups per 1 million of users. So last 20 years I was mostly working in different startups. And if you would like to contact me, then this LinkedIn profile and Twitter. So, CDNs. Before I will talk about CDN, I will give little information about Ask.fm. What is Ask.fm? Usually what it looks like that you have one data center where you're hosting your website or your servers, and then all users in the world connect to that data center to get the data. For example, you have a news website and it's hosted in Amsterdam. And all users from Europe will connect very fast to this data center. But what if you have users in, like South America or Australia, or God forbid in Japan or China? It will be very fast for them to connect to the website, even if your website is very fast and optimized. It's still laws of the physics that it will take at least, for example, in case of Japan, it will take at least like 140 milliseconds to get from Japan to Amsterdam via fiber optic. And of course, if you're like big internet startup, or company like Facebook or Google or Microsoft, you have multiple data centers all around the world, so you could serve your users from South America in data center, from, for example, from Brazil, and so on. But usually it's very complicated and very expensive to have multiple data centers. And that's where we come to content delivery network. So what happens here? You still have your original server where you're hosting your data or service. It's called origin server, and here you can see that it's in the red. For example, it's in Europe. But then, usually your users will connect directly to this server. But if you're using content delivery network, for example, Akamai, then your users will connect to servers that are provided by Akamai network, and Akamai has 170,000 servers all around the world. It's not only in each country, it's usually in each internet service provider. And then those servers that are usually called edge servers connect to your origin server to get the content and then cache it. So the first time some user connects, for example, to view some picture, it will be delivered from your data center to edge server, and then it will be cached there. And then if any other user from this country wants to to view the same picture or download the same JavaScript file, it will be already in the cache. And this way you could greatly improve latency and response for your website. But CDN is not free in case that it not only will cost you money, but it will complicate your architecture. So you need to understand when you need to use it. And I would like to highlight 4 big cases here. So first case is like pretty obvious that you have users in different geolocations all around the world. And the rule of thumb, if your data center is in one continent and you want to serve content to the users in different continents, then it's probably a very good case for you to use CDN. Another case, imagine you're some kind of multimedia site. And sometimes some specific content could go viral. That suddenly a lot of users will try to view specific video file or image and that will create very huge spikes of traffic to your website. And you have two choices. One, you could upscale your service or scale horizontally on your backend, and if you are not ready for that, it could be very expensive. Or you could use CDN, and CDN already have all capacity and technology down there, and you just say that this file will be served using CDN, and CDN will be able to handle any kind of traffic that users will generate to it. Third case that is very popular nowadays, and I see that many startups even don't understand this, but if you're hosting in big cloud like Amazon Web Services or Google Cloud or Azure, all incoming traffic to your service in those clouds is free, but all outgoing traffic from your service to the end users you need to pay, and usually it's very expensive. So if you look at standard pricing of, for example, Amazon, you will pay around starting from 8 cents per each gigabyte of data. If you have small website, it's not a problem, but as soon as you start to have more than a couple of terabytes of traffic per month, it could become very expensive. And that could be the case when you could also look to CDN to just lower the cost of your service. And the fourth case is also very popular with startups, that in many cases, a couple of people could have idea, they do some prototype very quickly, maybe it's PHP or something similar, and it will be not very fast, and then service becomes popular very fast. And the owners and developers didn't know anything about caching on backend, how optimize server code, and what happens that they need to handle additional load to their website, and they don't have the skills. And in this case, you could use CDN to help you. So what you could do, you could configure CDN to cache specific parts of your dynamic content from the website and serve that to the users. So let's take an example that your news portal that, for example, aggregates news about some specific sport competition. And it's okay if you serve not always the greatest content, but content could be stale, for example, for 30 seconds. And in this case, it doesn't matter if you could generate this page very fast or it will take 1 second. You could configure CDN to cache to load this page once and erase it for all users for next 30 seconds. And you have your problem solved. So if you decided that you need to use CDN, let's look what kind of content you could serve via CDN. I will separate in 3 different layers. So first layer is the easiest one. If you have website, you probably have already HTML, CSS, JavaScript, files, some multimedia content, and you could easily move that content from your web server or Nginx or whatever you're using to CDN. And you will not have that traffic going anymore to your web server, and it will be served very fast by CDN. The second case is that imagine your service that allows users to share presentation like SlideShare. Or if you're Ask.fm and you allow users to upload images and videos, and a lot of them. So you could move delivery of this content to end user to CDN, and it will greatly improve your performance. And the third case is that you could also cache some parts of dynamic content. And again, you could use something like Varnish, if anyone is familiar here with this. Or you could use Cdn Provider that will do all the hard work for you. You just need to configure it. So let's assume that you decided to move some of your website content to CDN. So what do you need to do? Well, you need to look at all CDN providers, and nowadays there are more than 100 of them. Like 15 years ago, it was very easy. There was like 2 CDN providers and that's it. Nowadays, there's even more than 10 tier 1 CDN providers in the world, so choice is not very obvious. But even if we look at like tier 1 CDN providers, we could divide them in 3 categories. One category could be providers like Level 3, Edgecast, Hibernia, Highwinds, Tata Networks. This is actually the companies that own fiber optic that goes between continents, and all those providers provide CDN service for you on top of their network. The second set of CDN providers is someone like Akamai or Amazon CloudFront. So Akamai is the biggest CDN provider in the world. The oldest one is almost 15 years old. Amazon is usually the default choice for everybody who is using Amazon Web Services because it's easiest to set up. And the third category of CDN providers that evolved and appeared in last 2 years is providers like Cloudflare or Fastly. Those companies drive technology innovations in CDN space. It's like they're software only. They specialize on different optimizations and configurations, and you could find a lot of interesting things there that are not provided by companies like Level 3. But before you go and select some companies for your trial, you need to collect some data. And what you need to know before you will go to CDN provider and set up your trial? Well, you need to understand how much traffic you're generating now each month and how much traffic you'll be generating for next 12 months, because all contracts are usually for 12 months. You need to know your distribution between different continents, and the reason is that traffic to USA and Europe is usually the cheapest one, but if you need to serve customers in Japan, it usually will cost you 5 times more than to serve customers in Europe. You need to know you don't need to know, but it will help you in negotiations if you know what is your average file size, what is your size of the library that you will be serving via CDN, how many files, what volume it will be. If you're using HTTPS, you need to know how many requests will be going via HTTPS, and so on. And then you will select few providers and try to contact them. Well, unless CDN provider has free trial available on their website, there's a very high chance that they will ignore your request. Unless you're coming to them and say, hey, I want to move more than 1 petabyte of traffic per month, they will be mostly not interested in you because you're too small for them. And that was always the problem, but there's specialized companies called CDN integrators, and you could go to them, and they have connections in all CDN providers, they know all the prices, and they could get you the deals. And that's actually the case with even AskFM. We have traffic of more than 2 petabytes per month, and we contacted some of the big CDN providers, and they just ignored our request or sent some outrageous prices. But then we use service of one of those companies, and they get us very good offers. So even if you don't have very huge amount of data, you could use this service. But as I said, there are more than 100 companies. and they're different quality, they have different market share, so prices between them could differ up to 4 times. Like usually the highest prices will be from very good established providers like Akamai, but in some cases you could get very low prices from someone who is trying to enter the market, and it doesn't mean that they're bad because they have low prices, it's just they want to grab some market share. And to give you the idea of the prices for CDN traffic, well, the highest prices will be for traffic in Japan. And if you have, like, for example, 1 terabyte of traffic per month, it could cost you 30 cents per 1 gigabyte. But if you're moving something like 1 petabyte per month, and then price could go down up to half of the cent. So there's like very huge variation in prices. So, and they're not set in stone. Like a few years ago, you could negotiate your prices. Nowadays, you could negotiate your prices and conditions with everyone, including Akamai. Well, now you selected few companies and ready to start your trial. There's still one question that you need to answer for yourself, is that you still need to have a region server where you'll be serving your content for CDN network. And usually there are 3 choices. First one is the most obvious one, that you probably already have your web server or your Nginx, and it's already working, and you could use it. But the problem is, usually this server is not highly available, and this server usually couldn't handle big spikes in traffic that could come to you. But again, it's free, it's already working for you. The second choice, you could use something like Amazon S3 storage or Google Cloud Storage or Azure Storage. And those companies provide you storage solution that is very highly available. Basically, it never goes down. It's infinitely scalable, but it has downside also that it will cost you money. Usually, it's around 30 cents per gigabyte of data that you store there. And you need to integrate with it. But again, it's not very expensive. If you look at prices, like if you want to store 1 terabyte of data in S3 in Amazon, it will cost you only $300 per month. It's not a very huge amount of money. The third choice is that it's very similar to the second one, except you will be storing data at your CDN provider. And the benefit of this approach is that it will be the fastest solution. You will get the lowest latency from storage solution to CDN provider. But it has downside. It's usually 10 times more expensive than, for example, storage from Amazon. Now you selected where you will be storing data, and now you need to know one important aspect about working with CDNs, that CDNs love immutable data. That means that every file and every revision of that file should be uniquely identifiable. And usually you could accomplish that in 2 different ways. One is you will have unique file names for each version of the file. For example, you serve a JavaScript library for your website, and you could just create new file name for each build of this JavaScript. Or you could reuse the same file name, but then you will append some data using query parameters to that file in URL, and both of them will work. But if you have the choice, always go with unique file names, because it will reduce amount of the pain that we will have with some specific CDN providers. So now you're ready for CDN trial, and you selected, for example, 2 companies. How you will evaluate them? Well, I will say that you need to perform 3 different stages of testing. First one, you need to measure the latency from your end users to edge servers of this specific service in different countries. And to do that, you could add specific code to your mobile application or website that will download one specific file for small percentage of your users. And then you record this data, you create statistics by country or by location, and you look at the results. What's the idea here? If you use the same file, it will be always in the cache of Cdn provider. So you're not testing how good he's caching content, you're just measuring the latency. And it could look like that this is not like very important step, but from my experience, I could say that the latency difference could be up to like 3 or 5 times between different CDN providers in the same country. And it could be the case that not all CDN providers have edge servers in all countries. For example, not many CDN providers have servers in Mongolia. But if you have users in Mongolia, you could like greatly benefit from CDN provider who has edge servers there. After you did some latency tests, I would suggest that you will direct small portion of your live traffic or specific country to CDN and measure latency for users for using these CDN servers, and you measure what is offload or hit rate. So what is offload or hit rate? You will like always get this information from CDN providers. It basically says how often your CDN provider goes to your origin server to fetch content. So if you're delivering some content using CDN and you see that your offload rate is like 90%, it means that every 10th request goes to your origin server to get the content. If it says 50%, it means that every second request goes to your origin server, and that's very bad. And I said before, it's also important to measure the latency between edge servers and your origin server. It could look like that if like servers are very near, it should be very small and negligible, but sometimes like it just doesn't work. There could be some incompatibilities, there could be some bugs in CDN provider because it's just software and hardware, and it could malfunction, so you need to measure that. And that's usually where majority of startups finish their work with CDNs. They selected companies for the trial, they did the trial, they got some numbers, and after that, they went to production, and that's it. But there are 2 very important items that you need to monitor even when you're in production. Point 1 is that you need to continue to monitor your offload rate, you need to continue to monitor your latency. Why? Because CDN is just another software company. They could easily deploy a new release that will break your offload rate. And like from our own experience, we could say that we use multiple CDN providers, and one of the CDN providers did deployment, we didn't know about that, but our offload rate dropped like 20%. And if you don't monitor that, you will never know that. Unless you have a lot of statistics, you will see that users are more slowly loading your website, and usually that will be already too late. And the second most, I will say even more important, that you need to protect your CDN credentials. And especially if you're using CDN to serve content that could be exploitable, like JavaScript, HTML, even PDFs, or I don't know, like Word documents, whatever. Anything that could be exploitable. You need to like have strict security about access. You need to set up two-factor authorization there. Why? Does anyone know PageFair company? No? Okay, so this is a very big company that allows sites to track how many users are blocking advertisement on website using ad blocks. And what happened 1 month ago, that hackers launched phishing attack against administrators of PageFair. They got credentials to their Cdn account, and they replaced content of their JavaScript file that's embedded in many sites with malicious code that installs some botnets and trojans on the end users. So it's not very new problem, and that's why we have very nice thing called sub-resource integrity. This is new standard that's already live in latest versions of Chrome and Firefox, and it allows you to say that I want to include this specific file in my HTML, and a hash of this file should be this. So when browser downloads these files, it will hash the file and compare it against this value, and if it doesn't match, it will ignore it. This means that even if hackers are able to replace your JavaScript file, unless they also have access to your web server and could replace HTML with new hashes, you will be safe. And last thing that I want to share is some tips and tricks that we learned in AskFM over the course of a couple of years that we use in CDN. That in the end, CDN is just big collection of cache servers. So they have their limit on amount of files and size of those files that they could cache. And they share this cache between all the customers. So even though they don't advertise that you will get only this amount of space allocated to you in our CDN or this amount of files, there will be those limits. And in majority of the cases, it doesn't matter. But in some cases, if you're serving a lot of user-generated content, you will be affected by this. So if you have a lot of content that you're planning to serve via CDN, then talk with your Cdn provider in advance about those limits. Another thing that by default, all H servers act as independent cache servers. But all major Cdn providers allow you to enable middle tier cache. What it means? It means that Cdn provider could set up big cache cloud between your origin server and their edge servers. So your data will be cached on 2 different levels inside CDN. This will allow you to cache more data on CDN side and to hit your origin servers not so frequently. And also, you could have some legacy application that doesn't set up properly cache control headers for web. And sometimes you don't have any means to modify that. Well, all CDN providers allow you to override these rules on their side. So you could easily go to a CDN provider and say, all my content should be cacheable for 30 days, and that's it. You don't need to modify anything on your web server side. And the last point, it could be like very obvious, but many people forget about it, that CDN providers, they don't just cache specific URL to the file, they cache combination of URL, query parameters, and cookies by default. So if you serve the same file with different query parameters, it will be different cache entries. Different cookies, also different entries. So don't forget to disable that in your configuration if that's okay for your website. And that's it. So if you're looking for exciting work and want to attack problems that are described here, then feel free to apply for one of our open positions in AskFM.
We actually have 10 minutes for questions, so feel free.
What about SSL? Do many Cdn providers open your own domain for SSL content?
Yeah, so question was about SSL and custom SSL certificates. Yeah, so by default, all CDN providers will provide you shared CDN certificate, and it will be in majority of cases free. But you could set up your own SSL certificate with any CDN provider. Just take into account two things. One, it could take some time. In some providers, it could take 1 day. In some provider, it could take 3 weeks. And then they will charge you for it. So prices could go from like 600 per one certificate to up to 2,000 per month. Okay, more questions?
What CDN integrators can you recommend?
Question was about CDN integrators that I could recommend. Well, I don't want to advertise anyone. But if you have this question, I could discuss it with you after the talk.
If it's not a secret, which CDN provider are you using at AskFM?
Okay, so question was, what CDN providers we use in AskFM? Well, I couldn't tell you because almost any contract with CDN will say that's under NDA, and you couldn't say your conditions, pricing, and even that you...
You can trace route and check out.
Yeah. I will say that we use more than one, and if you check us from different geolocations, you could find out. The question was how many different CDN providers we use. So we use right now 3, and we're evaluating more. Not that we want to use more at the same time, but again, usually contract with CDN provider is for 12 months. So we have some already obligations that we made before, but we're constantly evaluating new providers.
Have you ever migrated from one to another, and is this painful for a company to make migration?
Yeah, so the question is, have we ever migrated from one CDN provider to another one, and how painful it is? Well, it all depends on your application and architecture, but basically you set up different CNAME records and just redirect them to different CDN providers. So for us, we do live migration without any downtime, and it takes us like 5 minutes. We could move any country from one CDN provider to another one in 5 minutes, but you just need to make sure that you need to take care of issue with cold cache. If you move something, for example, you take a big country like USA, move it from one CDN provider to another one, new provider will have no cache entries. So you will have huge spike of traffic to your region server. So make sure that your region server is able to handle that amount of traffic. Yeah.
Why you decided to use several interpreters?
Yeah, so the question is why we're using several CDN providers. Well, historically, like 2 years ago, you usually couldn't get good prices for CDN traffic that will be applicable globally. So we used different CDN providers for different regions, and for example, we could get good prices for Europe and USA in one provider, but then we'll get good prices, for example, for Japan or Australia or Africa in another CDN provider.
So it's just a question about money.
Yeah, it's a question about money. If you have huge amount of traffic, it will be a question about money. Yeah.
Is it possible to force CDN to refresh or clean caches, or maybe to rewrite some values in runtime by also the application to do it by itself?
Okay, so the question is, could you modify the cache entries in CDN provider? Yes, all CDN providers provide invalidations. Basically, you could say that this specific content should be removed from the cache. But there's some tricks. Some CDN providers could do it in like real time. For some providers, it will take a few minutes or hours to do that. And for some providers, it could be free. Others, for example, like Amazon Cloud Front, will charge you money if you do more like 1,000 invalidation per month.
Well, maybe expand on the previous question a bit more. If you're using different CDN providers or even the same provider but with different technical capabilities on different regions, how do you ensure the single version being at the same place at the same time?
Okay, so the question is, if we are using multiple CDN providers, how you will ensure that new version of file goes to all CDN providers? That's
Well, basically,
yeah.
Synchronization.
Yeah. So in our case, all content that we serve via CDN is always immutable. So if we modify a new file, it's just new entry. So we never modify any files that we serve via CDN. So we don't have this problem. Yeah, you get new paths to the file. So it could be different folder inside URL, or it could be a different file name. And this way, even if our user modifies picture, we always delete all one and create new one. This way, we don't need to deal with invalidations. Except some rare cases that even in this scenario, if you need to moderate your content due to legal reasons or some requests, you need to have capability to call an invalidation API on edge servers and delete that content there.
You assign content with new CDI, you also have to update your software to adopt the new API.
So the question is, if you change the CDN providers, do you need to update your integration with this CDN provider? Yes. In case of invalidations, yes. There's no universal API you need to integrate, but usually it's REST calls and very simple ones. So question there?
Where do you see the boundaries between multi-region deployments and using CDN?
So the question is how you decide to use multiple data centers or use CDN to serve the content. It's a very tricky one because in my experience, making software that is able to work on multiple data centers, it's not easy, technology-wise. Second one, even if you have multiple data centers, you need to be able to handle the spikes in traffic. And again, it could be a completely different problem because spikes could be very sudden. For example, like if something goes viral, traffic for that specific file could go from 0 to like gigabytes, like very quickly. And if you don't have that infrastructure in the place, you need to prepare that. And then the question is, do you want to invest to solve this problem yourself? Or you want to invest money and maybe develop your product and just offload this problem to CDN provider? And CDN providers know how to do that, like it's their business.
One more
CDN providers
question.
sometimes
Last-
get blocked by countries or organizations, or they themselves block some botnets. Have you encountered such problems?
So the question is that CDN service could be blocked in some countries.
Yes.
Well, I know only one specific country, usually it's China. And if you are dealing with China, usually you need to have your data centers in China because connectivity from China to outside, even if you pass firewalls and whatever restrictions they have, it's not very great. In all other cases, we never see problems with blockage of Cdn providers because like nobody could block, for example, Akamai in Russia because like everybody is there. Like 30% of traffic worldwide for CDNs goes through Akamai. So if you're using big CDN provider, you could block the CDN provider, but then you will be not blocking your website, you will be blocking a lot of sites. And that's it.